It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. I don't have to tell you that the idea of diversity has become such a political lightning rod in recent years, right? And people tend to think of it, perhaps because it's been so in the news just recently, as relatively new and maybe left-wing, tied to affirmative action, which only dates back to the 1960s, to DEI, which is an even newer phrase, maybe modern campus politics. And those debates have, of course, only intensified since the Supreme Court's 2023 decision, Students for Fair Admissions, which struck down race-conscious admissions policies at Harvard and UNC and prompted universities across the country to roll back or rethink diversity initiatives. And then there's the war on all things DEI from the Trump administration. But our guest now, Berkeley law professor David Oppenheimer, argues that the whole conversation is missing something fundamental. The idea of diversity didn't begin with modern wokeness, if you want to use that word, and it hasn't always been so partisan. His argument, boiled down, is that diversity was originally understood not mainly as a moral project or a form of restorative justice, but basically as a utilitarian concept about how knowledge works. We'll explain. David B. Oppenheimer is a clinical professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley, and the new book is called The Diversity Principle, The Story of a Transformative Idea. Professor Oppenheimer, thanks for joining us. Welcome to WNYC.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's a thrill to be here with you.
Go to the title of the book, The Diversity Principle. Is there a principle?
There is a principle, and that is that when you bring together people with different backgrounds and experiences, including people of different ages and religions and races and ethnicities and genders and disabilities and cultures, all kinds of identities that have affected their background and experience, they make better decisions.
And so you begin this book in the 18th century with the founding of the modern research university on that principle?
That's exactly right. The decision of Wilhelm von Humboldt, who was a leading figure in Prussia in the late 18th and early 19th century, and in 1810 founded the University of Berlin as what we now think of as the first modern research university, on a principle that they had to include Catholics and Jews who otherwise would not have been included because of the diversity that they brought to the institution and the challenges that they would bring in terms of how to approach ideas.
We talk about this in journalism too, right? It's not that people from different communities are there to sort of represent their community, but that people do have different life experiences that bring different kinds of expertise, different kinds of perceptions, different kinds of understandings that they all bring to the common enterprise of, understanding the world in the case of journalism, understanding larger truths in the case of academia.
Well, that's exactly right. There's an old phrase that was popular in my childhood, that great minds think alike. And it turns out that that's completely wrong. Great minds think differently. And part of the greatness of great minds is that they challenge each other because they think differently, because they bring different backgrounds and experiences to how they look at problems.
But it does seem like there are sort of two arguments for diversity that you sketch out in the book. One of them is more tied to reparations, the idea that we owe disenfranchised groups, or society owes disenfranchised groups, entry into certain institutions to make up for past racism or other inequities. So that's a sort of moral, social justice-based argument. And then there's the more utilitarian idea that you were just laying out, that diversity is ultimately just an effective tool for creating an intellectually rigorous environment, right?
Well, here's how I would link them. If you don't have tools to take those who have been dispossessed, those who have been disadvantaged, and create opportunities for them to be insiders, to participate. You don't gain the utilitarian benefits of diversity.
Right. And if we look at the Supreme Court's evolution here, now they've sort of abandoned the whole thing, but they seem to try to separate them over time, right? So there was a decision a few decades ago that said, no, you can't take race into account for admissions to college or grad school based on trying to make up for past discrimination, but you can take it into account for trying to build a diverse environment for its own sake, or to create that diversity principle of people having exposure to different to people of different backgrounds, fellow students of different backgrounds, and to create that holistic academic environment, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. From 1978 until 2023, 3 conservative Supreme Court justices led the way in saying it's important to allow universities, as part of their academic freedom, to use race as a factor and use ethnicity as a factor in making decisions about admissions in order to have a diverse class, because diversity contributes so much to the academic enterprise. And it was not simply a liberal idea. I mean, there have been a number of great liberals over the past 2.5 centuries who have pushed this idea forward, but it was embraced by conservatives as well until fairly recently in our history.
Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices like Lewis Powell, Sandra Day O'Connor, Anthony Kennedy were invested in that decision and that point of view, at least as it interpreted the Constitution that you were just referencing, right?
Exactly. All 3 of them, not simply Republicans, but fundamentally conservative in their view of law and in their view of politics, and yet very much the initiators and supporters of the diversity principle in higher education.
Listeners, we invite your calls, questions, comments, stories. When you hear the word diversity, especially in higher education, which is mostly the focus of David Oppenheimer's book, what does it mean to you? 212-433-WNYC. Any current college students, grad students, university faculty, former in any of those categories? 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692. Have things changed on your campus since the Supreme Court's 2023 affirmative action ruling? Have conversations around diversity, admissions, academic freedom shifted in noticeable ways? You can also call in with questions, of course, for our guest about the history of diversity in higher education. When does it go overboard, even if you support the diversity principle, as the title of the book calls it, if at all? 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. The conservative take on this, to some degree, also includes, excuse me while I clear my throat, also includes the word diversity, right? We hear so much more from the left about racial and socioeconomic diversity, but then from the right we hear viewpoint diversity, which has become a big talking point in recent years because a lot of Republicans say that conservative viewpoints in particular have been stifled at elite institutions. They may go out of their way to build a campus of people from different demographics, but they're all individuals from those demographics who agree with each other. Do you address this in the book?
Oh, absolutely. I am completely in agreement with those who say that we need more ideological and political diversity in universities and in all kinds of leadership opportunities. It's important that we have those voices. But here's where we part. The beginning of the diversity principle for those of us who work in the English language is John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill. And John Stuart Mill, of course, best known for his work, which he wrote with his wife, who's sort of been forgotten in history, on liberty, is all about viewpoint diversity. And then if you look a little more deeply, what you see is that for Mill, viewpoint diversity required racial and ethnic and religious diversity, because he understood and spoke about how these are the kinds of diversity that lead to background diversity, viewpoint diversity, experiential diversity, so that these things are linked. If you don't have racial and ethnic and gender diversity in a university, or for that matter in a boardroom, you are going to lose many of the benefits of viewpoint diversity, because our viewpoints are in part a product of our background and experience.
One critique you engage with in the book, including from Justice Clarence Thomas, is the idea that diversity can become more about optics than substance, just wanting to see different kinds of faces in the classroom. So how do you distinguish, how do you think as a university professor that schools can distinguish between diversity as an aesthetic and diversity as something that actually changes how students learn, think, and engage with ideas, and actually broadens all of those things?
Yeah, well, we have to encourage our students, in part through demonstrating ourselves the benefits of debate, the benefits of disagreement, the benefits of what Charles Eliot of Harvard called the clash of ideas. And that's an important part of what we do. But while we're talking about Justice Thomas, of whom I am in some ways an unexpected admirer, I think that before we dismiss the idea that race connects to point of view, we ought to look at Justice Thomas's opinion in Black v. Virginia, where the then 8 white members of the court all agreed that burning a cross by the Ku Klux Klan is at least potentially an act of political expression with protection from the First Amendment. And Justice Thomas wrote an eloquent and emotional dissent in which he talked about the true meaning of burning of a cross as an act of intimidation and as an act of terrorism. And it came out of his experience as a black man growing up in the South. There are ways in, well, I think I've said it all there. I should stop.
Would you say it's part of Thomas's critique, it's certainly part of some people's critique, that if there's a very conscious effort at creating diverse classes in universities, diverse workplaces, elsewhere, that you wind up shredding common bonds and having everybody kind of be representatives of their groups, and that works against kind of a, national unity, university unity, call it whatever you will?
Gosh, that's not what I see among my students, where I see all of these relationships that are built in the classroom that continue outside the classroom, where it's not that identity doesn't matter, but the sharing of experience matters far more. It's true that students gather to some extent in identity groups and find comfort and support in being with people who they see as like-minded, including like culturally or racially or ethnically. But it's also true that much of the work of being a student today means interacting with all kinds of people in a way that a few generations back it didn't. There was a movement at Princeton in response to affirmative action to keep Princeton male and white because of the belief that when you're with people you're comfortable with, you can think more deeply. And that has been just completely discredited.
There's also an argument that says, and I definitely hear this in politics sometimes, it goes like, who says diversity is a strength? Diversity can be a strength, but diversity in an organization like a business can also be a weakness because you have so much difference to manage. What you should be looking at is people who can all row in the same direction.
But if the boat is inefficient, you need people with different ideas about how to row more efficiently. And the data tell us that businesses with greater diversity in their leadership are more successful. There's a debate about whether there's proof of causation. That is to say, is it because of diversity that these businesses are more successful? And there are those who argue absolutely, and there are those who are skeptical about that. But the data are clear that businesses that have greater diversity in leadership are also more successful as businesses.
Danielle in the Bronx, you're on WNYC with David Oppenheimer, UC Berkeley law professor, author of the new book, The Diversity Principle, The Story of a Transformative Idea. Hi, Danielle.
Hi. I just wanted to say I'm a New York City teacher. I am a New Yorker originally, and growing up, I was in like a community that was pretty much Caucasian. And then as I got older and went to college and had different experiences, the diversity of my college campuses, of the school I teach at, of any of the programs that I've been associated with, has really taught me more than any book, any lecture. I've learned about myself, and I just think I agree with everything that's been said. And I hope that we can continue to make places a diverse place and not so homogeneous.
Do you want to say something about what you might have learned about yourself by being in a diverse environment?
Yeah, I feel like as someone primarily in a Caucasian neighborhood, I feel like when I was immersed in different cultures, I learned how to kind of see myself in a different respect. I always thought, as a young person, I had it bad. Like my parents didn't have the biggest house, and then learning situations from some of my coworkers or my peers in college of like the struggles that they had to go through, whether it be coming from another country or just living on the streets or in the shelters in New York City. I learned that like there's so much resilience out there, but also like certain things that I've been through that aren't as major, I've shown my resiliency.
A broader perspective on advantage and disadvantage. That sounds like then you might have had growing up. Daniel, thank you very much. And Amy in Ossining, you're on WNYC. Hi, Amy.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. I see you're a professor at Columbia.
Yeah, so I teach in the Sustainability Management program at Columbia, and we often talk about the value of diversity for sustainability, so sustainability of human systems and organizations. But I'm an ecologist, and I teach a course in biodiversity, and one of my favorite things to talk about is how valuable biodiversity is for functioning and resilient ecosystems, because every species plays a slightly different role under slightly different conditions. And I just love pointing out to my students the parallels here between natural systems and human systems, and that the value of diversity is probably one of the best lessons that we can take from nature.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
You want to tell us even a little more about that? Because, you're talking, what this conversation has been, and of course the politics are about different kinds of human beings, that kind of diversity. And you're talking about diversity across species and that we can draw parallels with these political or social conversations that we as humans have?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, every species, it can play a slightly different role in how the ecosystem functions. So you have your decomposers and your pollinators and things that enrich the soil and things that capture carbon in different ways under different conditions. And so the more diversity you start with, the more resilient that system is to change, the more functional that system is. Species tend to facilitate each other's functionality. And so we always say when we're managing habitats or in conservation, you want high biodiversity to ensure high function and high resilience. And I think the parallels are just absolutely there in our human organizations and institutions as well.
Amy, thank you so much. Professor Oppenheimer, before you go...
Oh, can I just riff on that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Go
because, chapter 1 of the book talks about Humboldt and also about his brother, who was a great biologist, naturalist, and explorer, and the connection of the Humboldts to Darwin. And I just think that the comments about the connection to biodiversity, it's great. And there's a new book coming out from the University of Amsterdam Press this fall on diversity, connecting diversity in science and our current understanding of diversity. And I'm really excited about that book, and hopefully about doing some talks with the author of that book, who's in Berlin. And then the other thing that on Columbia, one of the people I profile in the book is this remarkable woman named Catherine Phillips, who was the dean at the business school at Columbia and one of the originators of the field of studying diversity as science, studying human diversity as science, not in the sense of biology, but in the sense of the diversity principle. And she had a wonderful article in Scientific America, very approachable, called Diversity Makes Us Smarter.
We will leave it there with David Oppenheimer, clinical professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley. His new book is The Diversity Principle, the story of a transformative idea. If you want to hear more, he is going to be speaking about it at a New York event tonight with CNN's Van Jones. That's at the New York Public Library at 7 o'clock tonight. I'm told that tickets are sold out for in-person, but you can live stream it at nypl.org for New York Public Library, nypl.org. David Oppenheimer with Van Jones at the library at 7 o'clock tonight. Thanks so much for sharing your book with us.
Brian, thank you, and thanks for everything you do for New York.
That's so nice of you to say.
WNYC Studios is supported by AT&T. Summer, it's when we share more time, more memories, and more photos. And at AT&T, the iPhone 17 Pro is your summer essential. Its center stage front camera auto-adjusts the frame to fit everyone into group selfies. Right now at AT&T, ask how you can get iPhone 17 Pro on them with eligible iPhone trade-in any condition. Requires trade-in of iPhone 15 Plus or higher, excluding iPhone 16e and 17e. Requires eligible plan. Terms and restrictions apply. Subject to change. Visit att.com/iPhone or visit an AT&T store for details. WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.